Well, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Jason Levine, and thank you so much for joining me today for the Monday Creative Kickoff, where today we're going to be revisiting the classics. Well, really just talking about I saw a couple of posts on Reddit over the last week, actually particularly in the After Effects subreddit, where a couple of designers were just showing off some really cool animations that they did. But they made a point to emphasize that these were done with some sort of old school effects, things like page turn well, anyway, we'll get into what they were. And I'll show you this one particular example that I just thought was great. And it was sort of a reminder that, yeah, there's some, especially in the world of video, just like with anything, there's certain effects or trends or styles. You see this in, typography and graphic design all the time that, they have their moment in the sun, so to speak. And then they're basically considered, passé or just lame or how did we ever, like that sort of thing. And then there are those that they just sort of endure. They work. And if you know how to use them creatively, or you think about using them creatively, yeah, they can actually produce really cool results. So I'd love to get your thoughts on some of these. We're really just going to be talking about them because it reminded me, certainly in my early days in the music biz and things, and, seeing people when I was in school and talking about their gear and all the stuff that they used to produce their sound. And they needed a particular guitar or a particular pedal or a particular whatever. And then you had friends of mine, and myself included, who were like, it doesn't really matter what the axe is, the instrument that you're playing. It's the technique behind it. And this comes out of a blues tradition. There were some really classic bluesmen back in the day, and traditionally had pretty crummy gear, crummy, sometimes sort of homemade guitars and things, or homemade strings. The content was amazing, right? What they could produce with it was amazing, and it was even more amazing that they could produce the sound that they did with something that wasn't a Martin. I'm trying to think of a model number, can't think of it offhand, too early on a Monday, but you get the idea. So this kind of just got me down this rabbit hole of thinking about effects and things and all the kind of stuff that we do. Anyway, all that to say, great to see you all. Thank you so much for joining. See, we've got Voodoo Val, Penny Doodles, Tim, of course Tim saying, yes, Star Wipe is back. I mean, again, some maybe should never have happened. No, that's not true. Sean Cassell, great to see you. Thank you so much. Exotic Place. How are you doing? Lauren Friesen. Oh, you're very kind. Thank you so much. Ron Sussman, how's it going? Tia Yo. TR Bolin, Retro Like You. That's awesome. Cherise Addison, how's it going? Nice to see you all. Yeah, this is very, these streams on Mondays now are super chill. So let's get chill, shall we? Okay, so let me go and just real quick, let's just bounce over to this. I just wanted to show you this. So this was one that I found on Reddit. And again, I was particularly interested by this because it was just cool. And the guy talked about, oh, this was really done very simply. So let's just move over to this. So here's the animation, and you can see he says up here, had some fun using good old page turn and bend it. And anyone who's worked in After Effects, these are some pretty old school effects. They've been in After Effects for at least, I think as long as I've been here, 20 years if it's a day. And it's not even that these are specifically used in the most traditional way, but I think more importantly, it's like you look at the beautiful typography. I love the sort of the color palette on the news font or whatever that sort of title design is. I don't know what it is. It just spoke to me. And then you see kind of the upvotes here. Oh, you can't see them. My head's in the way. You can see my comment right there. 349, 38 comments. But it was just super cool. So I actually just wrote the dude, and I was like, hey, this is really cool. A great reminder that the oft-forgotten effects can still produce beautiful results, especially where there's nice design typography involved. And he wrote back, and he was like, I love animating type and still need a lot more practice with setting it nicely first. I mean, I love the spirit of that in and of itself, because it's like, oh, no, this was just me playing around, having fun, just being a bit humble about it. And no, this is awesome. I mean, it's well done, and it's beautifully done. And if someone said, hey, that was done with page turn and bend it, Yeah, even I, to some degree, would probably scoff. Like, really? Page turn? What? Is this 1995? Okay, so with that in mind, let's just bounce over to Premiere for a second here. I just pulled up the last project that I happened to open in this version. So coming back to our old friend Pennywise and Jason here. These assets will never die. What's up, Robert? Hi, Paul Weaver. How are you? Hello, Mel D. Okay, so this is too. It's something that I often don't really we don't really talk about much, but just in general, sort of the variety of effects in Premiere. And this is probably another good opportunity to also talk about certain things that, again, I find over time that, especially as people get into Premiere who are new to Premiere and producing content and not really as familiar with bit depth and what all of that means. And now, of course, we're so used to HDR and, but you still might be working in 8-bit, or maybe you're working in 10-bit, or you don't know. And why, when I use this or export this, do I see banding or pixelation or whatever it is? So a lot of this has to do with some of these buttons up at the top here that you see where, for instance, if you see this icon, it's telling you that it's 32-bit color, or if this is applied, in this case, it's going to be just greater than 8-bit. Accelerated effects, meaning that they'll take advantage of GPU acceleration. And then, of course, YUV effects, which is probably a little less applicable to most users in Premiere today. So, if you've never just scrolled down the video effects list here, you might be missing out. It's funny. It's one of those things I can think back in the early days, certainly in Premiere, and especially with early DAWs, audio workstations. I would go through every single effect just to try it, just to see, what does that do? What does that produce? So, if you go into things like adjust, extract, levels, lighting effects, I'm even going to say as I choose this right now, I don't even know what is lighting effects. Okay. So it's lights. You can have multiple lights. Here, let's see. Let's expand this so we can read some of this a little better. Yeah, so you can have multiple lights. Oh, look at that. So spotlight, directional, omni. Okay, yeah, I've probably looked at this before. I just haven't used much of it. In this case, you can see that's a spot. Directional, whoa, kind of blown out. Omni, okay. Choose your light color, choose your light center. So that's kind of cool. Again, kind of cool. It serves a purpose if that's the kind of thing you want. You've got your radius, what's the plural of that? Settings and angle, intensity. Again, kind of fun to play around with. Ambient light color, ambient intensity, surface gloss, surface material. Then you have some exposure settings here. Oh, that's pretty cool. Can you? Oh, you can. Oh, that drops the exposure over the entire video. Interesting. Okay. White is high. I don't know what that does. It's sort of a limiter of sorts. But in any case, if you ever wondered, how do I add lights to things? Now, oddly enough, before I even just chose that, I would probably automatically use that in After Effects, just because I know how to do that a little bit better in After Effects. But this is one of those things. We have a lot of these things built in. Now, having said that, and I can even see it kind of it's already giving me some kind of artifacting here. And this kind of comes into, or plays into what I was saying before. Not all effects are created equal. And particularly in the Premiere environment, one thing you want to be aware of, especially if you're working in 10-bit HDR or you're working with any kind of raw video, whether that's Red or Blackmagic or Sony or what have you, basically anything 10-bit or beyond, you largely want to make sure that whatever effects you're applying have this little 32-bit color icon adjacent to them. And that really goes for any visual effect that you're going to apply. Reason being that, well, there's a couple things at play here. So first of all, Premiere Pro, I remember back in the day, people used to ask, particularly right when we introduced the Mercury playback engine, and we were talking a lot about people were comparing us to Final Cut, and how if you wanted to work in greater than 8-bit or 10-bit color space, or did Final Cut even do 16-bit color? I don't even remember if it did 10, 12 years ago. But you had to transcode into something like a ProRes 422, 444 to be able to color grade or apply color effects in that greater than 8-bit depth in the timeline. And Premiere has always been, since Premiere Pro, it's not bound to a bit depth. It's always sort of working natively in 32-bit floating color, 32-bit float color. And then whatever you put in the timeline, effectively you're working in 32, and then how you ultimately export determines what the end result is. But the idea is that there's no cap. You can bring in whatever type of footage. It can be 8-bit footage, but you can still use 32-bit color effects over top of that. If you are using, say, 10-bit HDR footage, you want to make sure that you're using these 32-bit color effects or effects that have that icon next to them, because otherwise what's happening is, yes, it's allowing you to apply these 8-bit effects, which is what this lighting effect is, but what that means is that you're essentially processing it in 8-bit as well. So you might end up with, you can even kind of see it here, some banding, some artifacts, some pixelization. And this is pretty common, especially if you're doing things like fade up from black via, or you have a vignette or something. Or people often run into this when you're using a dynamic link between Premiere and After Effects. But remember, in After Effects, and here I'm going to fire this up while I'm talking, while I'm yammering here. Here, let me go back to my camera for a second. I just updated everything, and I've noticed sometimes it's removing, I don't know why it's removing the icons. It's very strange. My Mac OS, this machine, which will be swapped out shortly, it's been doing weird stuff. After Effects, you have, as a user, you have to consciously make a choice. You determine inside your comp if you're working in 8, 16, or 32-bit. It's really critical, one, to know where that setting is, but two, if you're working with Premiere, particularly with dynamic links, that, again, for the most part, you probably want to be in 16-bit, especially if you're doing any sort of, detailed motion graphics work or anything that has sort of detailed color, and you want kind of color consistency, and there's other factors involved there. But anything with motion graphics, again, taking advantage of, say, 10-bit footage, you want to be in 16-bit primarily. You could leave it in 8-bit. Just know that if you do things, again, fade up from black, vignettes, really common stuff, you may end up with some visual banding or what looks like kind of pixelization, because you've got the dynamic link running. Premiere, again, has this 32-bit container, but it says, oh, After Effects is feeding us 8-bit. Let's process this. Let's export this and do all this work and finish this in 8-bit. So you're going to end up with some artifacting there. Let's migrate stuff over. Okay. So hold on. It's still loading here. Let me go check the chats while we're at it. Bhavith Kumar, hello. Loriandini, hi. Nice to see you. Mari Dikaminja, hello. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining. So I'm curious, for those of you in the chat, what effects, what kind of old school effects do you lean into while this is still launching After Effects? Let's go back here for a second. Again, so just talking about that 32-bit. So if we go into color correction here, this is a good example. So something like the video limiter. So this is really common in broadcast workflows, 32-bit color. So again, regardless of what you got in the timeline, you use the video limiter. It's going to process at the highest bit rate possible. Only by your export choice does it then take all that high bit depth information and convert it down to 8-bit. Say if you're going to an H.264 MP4, for YouTube or whatever. The tint effect, though, know what tint is. Now we have that in Lumetri. You could add another Lumetri, which is 32-bit float, of course. Tint is not a 32-bit color effect. So unless you're going for a slightly gritty, early 2000s looking video, I wouldn't use this one, especially on things like text or, if you're bringing in Illustrator files or vectors. You don't want to use these. It's going to degrade them ultimately when you export to some degree. It may not be completely visually obvious depending on what you're doing, but just know that if you want, these are some of the potential things that could happen if you aren't aware of this. Same with color balance. This is so common in the Photoshop world, brightness, contrast, but these in particular, they're not 32-bit effects. So I wouldn't use these as color grade tools on my, 4K 10-bit HDR content, because it's going to suffer when I go to export. Everyone's being very quiet. Hey, David. Oh, I appreciate that. Another great toot. Oh, well, that's very nice. Yes, this is kind of, slightly out there nerd stuff, but I think it's important stuff. So here's another one. You know, we use a lot of blurs for various reasons in video, and we've got quite a few we've got quite a few blurs. Oh, it just launched After Effects. What just happened here? Got quite a few blurs. While that's opening, let me go to this. All right. Well, let me just go back to Premiere for a sec. We've got quite a few blurs in here. Now, I'm someone who's quite fond of the box blur in After Effects. But, you know, Gaussian blur, whatever you call it, that's the only 32-bit effect in here. Directional blur, reduce, interlace, flicker, sharpen, unsharp mask, these are not. And again, we've got sharpening in Lumetri. We've talked about that at length on various streams in the past. You know, used carefully, it can work. I can't think of actually any video really that I've probably ever sharpened necessarily. I mean, I'm sure I've applied it at least a few times, but almost never. But again, if I'm working off of DV footage, I guess it doesn't really matter. I just probably wouldn't use this sharpen. If I needed to use sharpen, I'd use sharpen inside of Lumetri, in the Lumetri effect itself, okay? And then as we continue to go through these, you know, there's some that are a bit more interesting. Now again, some of your distortion effects where you're already manipulating pixels and making things a little, you know, potentially different. You're seeing here, these are not color effects per se, but they're not 32-bit. So that's fine. Corner pin, this is kind of a classic. You know, again, this is a classic that people still use. You're trying to, you know, mask an image. Let's say you have a static television in a shot, and you want to put something on that screen. You can use corner pin to take another video and kind of place that onto the aforementioned screen. Lens distortion, correction, magnify, mirror, rolling shutter. This was something coming out of the early DSLR boom days. I'm curious if anyone's going to say that, you know, if people are still running into rolling shutter issues. I guess if you're still shooting on sort of old school 7D, 5D, nothing wrong with those, by the way. But this was an artifact of those early DSLR video capture processes, so we have that to repair. Spherize, again, this is kind of a kind of a classic old school. What's Paul Weaver saying? I would be so disappointed if you didn't nerd occasionally, as you also know how to explain things to non-nerds. Oh, thanks, Paul. Well, yeah, you know, we switch it up. Turbulent, displace, twirl. Now, warp stabilizer. Again, now, you'd think, wouldn't that be a 32-bit effect? I mean, this one is indeed due for an update because it's not dealing specifically with color. Maybe that's why. But, you know, again, there's trade-offs, of course, in general when doing warp stabilization. This is another one where the updated warp stabilizer in After Effects, I tend to find, in general, it just gives me a little bit more control. And because I actively can adjust bit depth and things, I tend to get slightly better results over there. Having said that, let's go back over here. So we were pointing this out before. So this is just a little animation of my lower third here, which was in fact a Mogert. But wanted to point out down here in After Effects, so down at the bottom of the project panel, this is where you set your bit depth, your bits per channel for the comp. So I always, is it option? Yeah, option, click, or option is the same as command on PC. Is it option, option, control? Who can remember this? My son has a PC and his power adapter died, and it's a, I won't say which brand, great laptop, but it's like it's a proprietary connector, which now in Mac land we're so used to now USB-C, but you know, and they had the MagSafe ones, which I guess were proprietary for a long time. You see a lot more of this now, of course, in the Windows world, and the drag is it's a proprietary connector, so when it dies and it stops charging, you are out of luck. So, you know, last night I was trying to MacGyver a solution, almost electrocuted myself. I don't know where I'm going with this. Anyway, option, command, control, whatever. Option on Mac, command or control on PC, I can't remember what it is. But this allows you to flip between 8, 16, and 32-bit. So as mentioned, when you're doing something like this, where in theory, you know, I could take this master comp, right, and drag this into Premiere Pro as a motion graphics template. This content here was shot 4K. I want to kind of preserve the color and bit depth of this. I would want to be working, and because I'm using something that has like a particle system in it, when I export that, I want it to look good. I don't want it to look pixelated and weird. I can now bring this in, right? So this is coming from After Effects, and it's going to look good. And by the way, as I scrub here, remember that these motion graphics templates, much like in After Effects, if you scrub through them, it'll start to effectively cache those frames. So if I were in After Effects, this is not, yeah, see, it's caching when idle. This is something that we added, right, a couple versions ago. But if I were to cache these frames here, which I'm going to do, this will, of course, effectively cache them on the Premiere side as well. So you'll get a slightly faster, real-time-ish preview of this. Okay, I'm just going through this for the sake of it. It's not taking too long. Hello, Annika. Option is Alt, Command is Control. Thank you. I wonder how many people here actually know what a lower third is. That's a great question, Paul, and one that's worth reminding people. So this is it, effectively. So you see this in any news program, and you know, even in social posts these days, where if you imagine your screen, your television screen, laptop screen, whatever, is broken into, we tend to, you know, the rule of thirds in photography, we tend to do the same in video. And in this case, that graphic that you see along the bottom third of the screen, the lower third of the screen, is where you tend to put titles. In this case, my name, my handle, my title, some graphics. So that's where that comes from. Great question. And again, they're so ubiquitous, they're used everywhere. So now, if I go back to Premiere, let's see if that paid off. Yeah, there you go. So now that we've previewed that on the After Effects side, you can see that it's now real-time previewing in here. But my point of this was, because we've got those beautiful particles, this way now I know that when I go to export, I'm not going to lose. I'm not, you know, it's not going to do something weird. There were a couple of Reddits that I saw this weekend where people were wondering, how come my exports have weird banding or pixelization? It's likely because the bit depth is a mismatch between Premiere and After Effects. Okay. All right, let's go back to effects here. We just got a couple more minutes. So again, distortion, used to seeing a lot of those. You know, keying, this is another one where, now here, when we're talking about keying, this is again where it's really critical, most likely, especially if you're shooting and, you know, higher bit depth or raw video, you're going to want stuff that has that 32-bit icon. So the track matte key does, the Luma key does, alpha and color don't, and ultra key doesn't. So ultra is Premiere's native green screen keying effect, similar to key light in After Effects. It's good. This actually came out of, oh, what was the product that we took this from? Well, the product was called Ultra, but Serious Magic. And when we acquired them back in 2006 or 7, it's a really fast, really quick, one might say down and dirty green screen keying effect. And it works, and it's easy, and it's got really simple controls to kind of choke, you know, the mask. It's good. It's good. It's not key light. Key light in After Effects, which is a 32-bit effect, you know, has actually I think it's actually won a technical Oscar years ago. So it's super high quality. So not that this isn't going to give you good results, but again, it just kind of depends what you're doing with it and what you're exporting to, and these are just things to consider. A lot of times, you know, people are not aware. All right, you also see one of my favorite, this is the old version, right? I think they're on V6 or 7 now, but Neat Video, obviously 32-bit. This is a noise reduction plugin. You know, not sponsored. I've just been using that. I've been using them and purchasing them forever, and they're great and super reliable, and work pretty well these days, and a lot better in real time. What else have we got in here? Metadata and timecode burn-in. Again, you wouldn't need it for that. SDR conform. Yes, you'd want it for that. Simple text, wouldn't need it for that. transform, you've got auto reframe, yes, horizontal flip, but not vertical flip is not 32-bit, that's odd. Crop and edge feathering, again, some of these a bit more in the old school time. And then of course in your video transitions, as we were joking with Tim earlier, this is where you have, some of those classics, page peel, page turn, cube spin. Gradient wipe is in fact a 32-bit float effect. Oh, you can't see there. 32-bit color effect. I keep saying float. I shouldn't say that. The bulk of your dissolves are film, dip to white, dip to black, and cross dissolve. And again, these are the most commonly used ones. But just to point out that go through the list, check these things out, and experiment. Because just because they've been around a long time, maybe they are 8-bit, doesn't mean you can't do really cool, interesting things with them. So that's a little look at some of the effects and things in Premiere and After Effects. Have a great rest of your Monday morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you again, friends, next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.